Welcome to The Business. I'm Catherine Robinson. Coming up on the program, leading the world. The economy bounces back with its strongest recovery in more than half a century.
In just over a year, the economy has recovered what it lost faster than any recovery from any major downturn in recent history.
And Australia talks. The majority of us think job security is a problem in this country.
We have this totally bonkers situation where we have people in long-term employment relationships in casual jobs.
Australia's economy has now grown to above pre-pandemic levels as the stronger than expected recovery from the COVID recession continues. But as Melbourne extends its latest lockdown, our economic fate is still very much tied to the trajectory of the virus. Stephanie Chalmers reports.
Before this latest lockdown in Victoria, Melbourne florist Shane Sopolis had never been busier.
We even had one weekend where we had to try and get 8 weddings done.
People had started to feel comfortable enough to reschedule events.
A lot of them had actually more money to spend, so they were coming back to me and asking to increase the floral budget.
In the first 3 months of this year, household spending rose 1.2%. That helped lift GDP by 1.8%. Australia's economy is now bigger than it was before the COVID recession.
It's a very strong set of numbers, and what's really quite encouraging is not just the headline, but when we look underneath the bonnet, there is a lot of strength.
A major contributor to growth, strong export prices, particularly iron ore. Housing construction increased, as did business investment, with the strongest rise in spending on machinery and equipment in more than a decade.
In just over a year, the economy has recovered what it lost faster than any recovery from any major downturn in recent history.
Globally, that puts Australia near the top of the pack.
When we compare with other countries like UK or US or any of the OECD economies, I think Australia did very well.
But in Western Sydney, some people are still concerned about their financial situation.
Much worse off than I was a year ago, very much so.
We can manage, we live comfortably.
It's half-half. I'm a full-time student, but I'm trying to find work, but it's been hard.
The biggest risk to the recovery is the cause of the recession in the first place, the health crisis, as demonstrated by the extended lockdown in Melbourne.
With another week of events cancelled, thousands of dollars worth of flowers are now destined for the bin.
There is a huge fear that anything can change at any moment, so that really rocks people's confidence.
The economy's growing again, but it's far from business as usual.
Markets shook off any concerns stemming from Victoria's extended lockdown to set a new record high. The All Ordinaries up by 1%, while the ASX 200 closed above 7,200 for the first time in its history. The Australian dollar falling back slightly to around 77.3 US cents. Well, parts of Victoria will remain in lockdown for another 7 days after the acting Premier, James Merlino, extended the stay-at-home orders in a bid to contain the COVID-19 outbreak. The estimated economic cost of the latest 7-day lockdown ranges between $900 million and $1.3 billion. In response, the state government is offering an additional $209 million in support for business and renewing its request for a JobKeeper-style payment to be reinstated by the Commonwealth. The Victorian head of the National Employer Association AI Group, Tim Piper, says he understands the government's lockdown position, but that we need to emerge from it as quickly as possible.
We've been talking to dozens of businesses today, and in fact we had a meeting today with about 80 of our members, and look, it's really going to be tough for them. Whether we support it, whether they support it, the fact is that we recognise the dilemma the government's in and that they need to be taking a measure such as this. But what we also need to make sure is the government makes sure that we come out of this as soon as we possibly can, not a day extra, because every day is going to be costing the economy and costing businesses and potentially their livelihoods.
The Grattan Institute says that the cost of letting the virus run rampant is difficult to put a number on, but it would be far more costly in the long run. Is the cost of not locking down greater?
I think the cost of not locking down, the potential cost of that would cause would be greater than what we're talking about now. There is some certainty around what it's costing us because we know what's happening. We have all manufacturing open, we have construction, we have outdoor activities generally being open, and that means that the economy can be maintained. We wouldn't like to see this running rampant, and I think that's the danger and the reason that we've had the lockdown that we have. Otherwise, you just expect the government to allow it to continue, but it won't happen, and we're not in favour of letting it run rampant, of course.
Tim, we've seen those really strong GDP numbers out today. We're arguably in this strong position as a nation due in part to the lockdowns that we've seen across the country over the past year or so. I imagine, though, that's fairly cold comfort to some businesses who are facing their second or third lockdown.
There are a range of businesses and a range of impacts in this. Some businesses have actually done quite well as a result of the lockdown because of the way we're buying. We're buying things differently. We're not buying the services. We're actually buying supplies and extending our houses and those sorts of things. But there are going to be other businesses who, as a direct result of this week or two, hopefully that's all it'll be, are really going to be struggling to maintain their position.
And what impact will the extension of this lockdown have on businesses who no longer have access to JobKeeper? They presumably have to keep paying their full-time staff and their rents.
Well, inevitably, people are going to lose their jobs, particularly those who need casual workers, and they'd like to be keeping their casual workers on, but it simply isn't sustainable under some circumstances, and they will need to let them go in order to keep their business running. They still need to be paying their rent. They still need to be paying many of their overheads. So I think that there will be a substantial impact both on the businesses themselves and indeed on their employees. And I think that's probably the biggest concern that we have with JobKeeper not being in place any longer. People aren't getting that sort of funding. There will be an impact across a variety of areas.
Tim, it's estimated 500,000 Victorian workers are casual. What will happen to them?
Well, what about them? That is a concern for them. Some employers that I've been talking to will be able to keep their casual workers on. Some that might be doing well in certain service trades despite the lockdown will want to maintain them and probably give them shorter hours. But there will be others that will have to say we can't keep our people on at the moment. We want them to come back. And that's one of the problems that we're going to have is getting them back into that business afterwards. We found that after the last lockdown, the longer lockdown, the people had moved on. They'd moved into other businesses. We're finding it especially in hospitality, and getting them back to work after this lockdown will be a concern for them.
These lockdowns seem to continue to be impacting on the same sectors and therefore increasing that divide between the two-speed economies and their recoveries. What's the longer-term impact of that?
Well, we saw the longer-term impact immediately that we came out of the first lockdowns is that we weren't able to get employees to the level that we needed to. We weren't able to get chefs back and working with us, and the cost of some of these people was going through the roof. We also found from a Victorian perspective they were going north. They were going to other areas where they knew that they were certain of being able to get jobs and more certain than they thought of maintaining jobs. So I think that we have to recognise that, that getting staff is going to be an issue, and then skilled labourers is going to be another factor.
The Victorian Government is offering an additional $209 million in support for small to medium businesses, taking the total support package to just over $400 million. Is that going to be enough?
Well, it's a help. Certainly it's going to assist businesses, but it's not going to necessarily get them over the line. It will help them to pay their rent, perhaps. It'll help them to pay for some of their losses in food or where they've had to throw product out. And it's going to be an enabler, but no more than that. Businesses simply need to be getting back on their feet and selling things to people to make sure that there's a reasonable profit.
Should the federal government be providing more support? Should it reinstate JobKeeper?
I think there's no doubt that the longer this goes on, the more likelihood there is that we will need to get federal government support. Whether it's JobKeeper or whether it's in some other form. I mean, there are issues around this. There are nuances whether we can introduce JobKeeper or not. But indeed, if this continues on, there's no doubt that I think people will be expecting the federal government to be assisting with what's happening at the moment.
What impact do you think the extension of this lockdown will have on the nation's overall recovery?
It's interesting because that's not a question that's been asked very much. We're very concentrating on what's happening in Victoria, but there's no doubt that Victoria is a major part of the nation. We're a quarter of the nation's economy, and when we're locked in, locked out, whatever it might be, it starts to impact on the GDP across the board. So the longer that any state, whether it's Victoria, even if it was possibly another state, is locked down, it's going to have an impact on across the board.
Tim Piper, thanks for your time.
Thanks very much, Kath.
Well, casual workers make up about a quarter of the workforce in this country. Economists say the push for flexible working arrangements has left many more people in insecure employment. And despite record job vacancies, the Australia Talks national survey reveals the majority of us think job security is a problem, as Gareth Hutchins reports.
Geordie Gilmore is trying to improve her employment prospects. The postgraduate student is one of 500,000 casual workers who are once again locked down in Victoria.
I was actually already jobless when the pandemic hit last year because I found 2 jobs and both of them tried to underpay me. And when I queried it, they stopped giving me shifts. But I'm pretty lucky this lockdown because I do have another barista job at the moment.
But Geordie's work situation isn't unique to Victoria. Across Australia, about a quarter of the workforce are casual workers. But economists say there are more people employed in insecure jobs as employers push for more flexible arrangements.
That's why we have this totally bonkers situation where we have people in long-term employment relationships in casual jobs. And it was not the way that casual work was supposed to be designated, which was supposed to be temporal and seasonal.
88% of participants in the Australia Talks national survey think job security is a problem for Australia in general. About a quarter, or 27%, are concerned they might lose their position within the next 12 months. And those over 50 are much less confident they could find new employment if they had to, compared to younger Australians. Dr. Jan Bryant is one of them. After nearly 11 years in a contract role as an academic, she's never been made permanent and is being let go at the end of the month.
One of my colleagues said, be resentful but not regretful, because the mood there is so bleak. When I rang my accountant last year to say that I was losing my job, she said that I was the 4th older woman to ring her that week from universities.
Dr. Bryant says the impact of insecure work can be devastating.
Having a contract hanging over your head has created a lot of stress for me because I haven't known how to plan for this moment.
Gone are the days when Labor Prime Ministers John Curtin and Ben Chifley chose to create full employment by pushing the unemployment rate below 2% to create jobs with decent paying conditions in the post-war era. Since the 1980s, Australia's economy has been dramatically restructured, and workers now face a range of insecure work, changing the nature of employment in this country. Job vacancies are now at record highs, and employers claim they're struggling to find suitable labour. Economist Hayden Dimes says if borders remain closed for a long time, it could help workers.
Australia imports a lot of its labour. We know that net migration here is very strong. When you do get very strong demand in the labour market, then typically you do start to see less casualisation.
For Geordie, she's looking forward to finishing her master's degree so she can start to look for more permanent work.
I finish at the end of the year, so after this semester is over, I'm basically going to be starting the job hunting slog. So, yeah, wish me luck.
A slog that many in her position face.
And that is all from The Business. For more on those stories, go to the ABC website and click on the business page. And you can always catch up with the program anytime on iView. I'm Catherine Robinson. Thanks for your company. Good night.